Throughout history, there have been rulers whose names continue to inspire awe and fear, even centuries later. One of them was Richard the First of England. Known for his courage in battle, razor-sharp sword, and fearless heart, this king spent most of his life not on the throne, but on the battlefield. But did you know that Richard the Lionheart spent only half a year in England during his reign? Let's dive into some fascinating facts about his life. Fact 1. Birth and family. On September 8, 1157, a historic moment took place at Oxford Castle in England, the birth of Richard, the future king who would earn the legendary name Richard the Lionheart. But Richard was not just any child born into a royal family. His life and destiny would shape the future of all of Europe. His father, King Henry II, was a strong and strict ruler, while his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was far more than just a queen. She was one of the most influential women in Europe, a symbol of political power and culture. Eleanor's intellect, courage, and political skill played a huge role in shaping young Richard's character. Richard's childhood was far from peaceful. Life at court was filled with intrigue, political schemes, and power struggles. Growing up in this environment, the young prince developed both strategic intelligence and a warrior spirit. Even as a child, he learned the art of swordsmanship and horseback riding, and he immersed himself in the world of music and poetry as a young troubadour. In Richard, the image of a cultured, yet fearless warrior prince was already taking shape. Richard's birth was more than just the arrival of a royal heir. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in Europe's political and military history. One day, he would write the stories of victories on the battlefield and witness some of the most dramatic moments on the throne. From the very start, Richard's life was filled with adventure and drama, which would make him an unforgettable figure in history. Fact 2. Childhood and youth. Richard's childhood was far from being just palace games and leisure. Although he was born in England, he was raised in French culture, and he even struggled with speaking English. His primary language was French. The young Richard grew up alongside his siblings under the strict rules of his father, Henry II. Life at the royal court was never peaceful. Intrigues among aristocrats and constant struggles for the throne shaped his character from an early age. Richard also showed an early interest in combat, horseback riding, and weaponry. He studied the art of the sword while also learning troubadour poetry and music, becoming both a warrior and a cultured young man. These early experiences would shape the man he would become, the one who would command armies on the battlefield, lead the Third Crusade, and make decisions that would change the course of Europe. Richard's courage, leadership, and warrior spirit were all forged during these formative years of his youth. Fact 3. The rebellious prince. The young Richard was far from being a quiet prince singing troubadour songs in the palace. His heart yearned for battle and power, and sometimes that desire led him to rebel against his father, Henry II. In 1173, Richard and his brothers rose up against their father's strict rules and political authority. They even formed a secret alliance with the King of France. Do you think this was a minor rebellion? No, it was a major family conflict that shook Europe. From an early age, Richard learned that a throne was not just inherited by birth, it had to be protected and sometimes fought for. This rebellion also tested his leadership and courage at a very young age. Here's an interesting fact for viewers. This young prince who would one day rule England and shake the battlefields during the Crusades started his path to greatness with this very first rebellion. Fact 4. Ascension to the throne and preparing for the Crusade. In 1189, following the death of his father, King Henry II, Richard officially became King of England. But he quickly realized that the throne was more than just a crown in a palace. It was a call to responsibility and the battlefield. The moment he ascended the throne, Richard made a firm decision. He would not sit quietly in England. His goal was clear: to join the Third Crusade and reclaim the Holy Lands for the Christians. He immediately gathered his army, inspected weapons, and sent diplomats across Europe. For Richard, this was a test of both battlefield skill and strategic genius. The throne was not just a symbol, it was a chance to etch his name into history on the battlefield. Here's something fascinating for viewers. The King of England would soon leave his own country and spend years on expedition. For Richard, it wasn't about staying on the throne, it was about ruling the battlefield. Fact 5. The Third Crusade. Immediately after ascending the throne, Richard set his sights on a bold goal: to return the Holy Lands to Christian control. This mission forced him to travel across Europe, gather armies, and form strategic alliances. Thus began the Third Crusade, one of the most famous military campaigns in history. The most dramatic part of this struggle was Richard's encounter with a formidable opponent, Saladin. Battles raged between the Muslim leader and the King of England, yet interestingly, they respected each other. Both leaders showcased strategic brilliance, courage, and combat skill. Richard won several victories, but he did not achieve total conquest. Instead, they negotiated a treaty. Christian pilgrims were granted access to Jerusalem, while the city remained under Muslim control. This crusade also demonstrated Richard's leadership and bravery to the entire world. His name, Richard the Lionheart, was cemented in history, not just as a warrior, but also as a diplomat and strategist. Fact 6. Richard and Saladin. One of the most fascinating events of the Third Crusade was the relationship between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. On the battlefield, they were enemies, yet in the midst of war, they approached each other with respect and tactical brilliance. Richard's forces clashed with Saladin's armies, but the strategy of both leaders was far more than just bloodshed. They recognized each other's strength, courage, and leadership. It is said that Richard even showed mercy to some captured enemies under Saladin's command. This relationship was also a moment where politics and diplomacy intertwined with battle. Richard and Saladin negotiated a treaty that provided a safe passage for Christian and Muslim pilgrims alike. Imagine this: two of the most powerful leaders testing their swords and wits on the battlefield, yet preserving principles of humanity and respect. This ensured that history remembers them not only as warriors, but also as strategists and diplomats. Here's something fascinating for viewers. Their relationship shows that war is not just slaughter, but also a game of respect and strategy. It is one of the rarest encounters in history. Enemies, yet mutually respectful leaders. Fact 7. Captivity on the journey home. After completing the Third Crusade, Richard set out to return to England, but a peaceful journey was far from waiting for him. In 1192, he was captured by the Duke of Austria and taken prisoner. The people of England and the royal court were in shock. Their heroic king was now chained and imprisoned. To secure his release, an enormous ransom was demanded, and the wealth of the entire kingdom was directed toward this purpose. But this captivity did not break Richard's spirit. Using his strategic mind and diplomatic skills, he explored every possible way to overcome the situation. Eventually, England paid the hefty ransom, and their king was set free. This event showed that Richard was not only courageous on the battlefield, but also a clever and determined leader in life. His name would be remembered in history not just as Richard the Lionheart, but also as a king of wit, courage, and resolve. Fact 8. Spending very little time in England. During Richard's 10-year reign as King of England, one of the most interesting facts is that he spent only 6 months in his own country. Yes, you heard that right. Even as king, he spent very little time on his own land. Richard's life was dominated by constant wars and travels. Territorial disputes in France, protecting the outcomes of the Crusades, and diplomatic maneuvers across Europe kept him constantly on the move. During this period, his name lived on in the memory of soldiers and citizens alike as a symbol of war and leadership. Reflecting on Richard's life, it becomes clear that being a king was not just about sitting in a palace. It required winning on the battlefield, at the diplomatic table, and during journeys abroad. Although Richard was not physically present with his people, he deployed all his strategies, armies, and plans to protect their interests. This shaped his image as both a protector and a brilliant leader. Thus, his limited time in England highlighted his courage, strategic mind, and leadership skills, leaving him remembered in history as an unforgettable king. Fact 9. His last battle and death. The final period of Richard's life was as dramatic and perilous as his entire reign. In 1199, during a siege at a small castle in France, Richard was seriously wounded. An arrow struck his body, Initially, the injury was treated as just another battle wound, but it became infected and threatened the king's life. He died at the age of 42, a hero of the battlefield and the leader of the throne and his armies. His death was a loss not only for England, but for all of Europe. The wars, diplomacy, and victories of Richard's life created the portrait of a legendary king in history. With Richard's death, an era came to an end, but his name, in the image of the Lionheart, remained eternal in history. A fearless, courageous king with unmatched strategic brilliance. Fact 10. Burial and historical legacy. Richard the Lionheart's life was filled with dramatic battles, journeys, and fame earned on the battlefield. But his story did not end with his death. After he died in 1199, Richard's body and head were buried in different locations. But most interestingly, his heart was kept separately at Rouen Cathedral. This decision made him a unique figure in history, remembered as a king, a hero of the battlefield, and at the same time a leader who honored cultural and religious traditions. The separate burial of his heart immortalized both his courage and his symbol as a man. Richard's legacy did not end there. The image of the Lionheart lived on in European history as a legendary hero. The Crusades, his bravery, diplomacy, and respect for his enemies, all of these continued to inspire future generations. So, we've taken a brief journey through the life of one of history's bravest and most legendary leaders, Richard the Lionheart. His courage on the battlefield, his brilliance in diplomacy, and the legendary mark he left in history are still talked about today. If you love discovering amazing historical stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to watch our new videos. And remember, the story of every hero in history also inspires future generations. Subscribe and let's embark together on adventures through history.